Welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. For those of you on Periscope right now, you're going, you just did a broadcast. And yes, when I checked the recording afterwards, I realized that the audio was bad. And so I went through, quickly checked my system here, and now the audio should be good. So I thought I would redo the show, but I realized I may not, be able to redo the show as good as what I thought I was doing the first show. Which, okay, yeah. But in any event, here, now there's not going to be a lot of graphics or video display here. It's pretty much just going to be me talking here, monitoring the chat and everything. And then I'll take the audio from this and put it up on the audio podcast. Audio is where I do more, or where I prefer to do most of my stuff. But I realize that there's a large audience, that wants video as well. So I'm doing video. But if you could do me a favor and just subscribe to the audio podcast, that would be great. Okay, so we're going through here and taking a look at the left today. And we go back and take a look at the issues that they say is the cause of all of our problems, right? The systemic racism going all the way back to the days of slavery and the Confederacy. They obviously failed history because they never learned the lessons of the Confederacy. And they're tearing down monuments here, Confederate monuments. Now, people have this strange idea that monuments are only about things we want to celebrate. No, they're things that we want to remember. And we do want to remember bad things as well, so that we can learn the lessons from that. But I understand if you take a look at the left today and the left back then, when they were, in control of the slave states of the South, you can understand that the Democrats don't want you to learn the lessons of history because they are currently engaged in a campaign to repeat that. And if you take a look at, how they're conducting, the protest, the bowing down, taking a knee, washing feet, it seems like they believe their answer to historical racism is more racism. They're just trying to flip the who's on top of the racism scheme and who's on the bottom being subjugated by racism. And that's the left. And that is, I guess, the main takeaway of the Confederacy is what happens when you have an egotistical elitist system that believe that, the people on top are not defined by what they actually accomplish, but based off of, immutable characters that they were born with, skin color, genitalia, and all that, the immutable characters, and, having a tier system that you're not able to move up and down. And today's left, they try to judge everybody based off of, how they look, and sexual orientation. And then they prioritize you based off of those categories and say, this is how much your opinion and your voice matters. And, oh, by the way, if you're at the bottom of this list, you shouldn't have any say in public discourse or society at all. You're just supposed to go, And it's interesting to see how the left tries to claim that they celebrate diversity. Look at all this, all these black people in the Democrat Party. But they're not allowed to have their own individual opinion is the problem. What good is having a diverse, race coalition of different races in your party if each race, instead of being able to contribute their own ideas from their own individual experiences, but instead are supposed to go along with and just nod their heads with what they're told to think, say, and believe. And anybody who exhibits an independent thought, they're not black enough. They're not Hispanic enough. They're ostracized and cast out of society. That's not diversity. Diversity is, and true diversity, the true diversity that makes us stronger is not based off of skin color, but based off of diversity of ideas. That's what matters most. That's what matters most. Now, I'll be monitoring the chat and be getting to it here in a little bit. I do want to thank Seer100. Thank you for joining. Okay, and hopefully I pronounced that name right. Sometimes the names aren't, as big as I'd like to be able to, and I wear corrective lenses, so sorry if I mispronounce your names when you show up in the chat here. But let's take a look here and dive more into the lessons of the Confederacy that the left refuses to learn, even though the left themselves were the Confederacy. All right? And I will use this more specifically to Robert E. Lee. Right? The lessons that we should learn from there. Now, Robert E. Lee, yes, he does have monuments. And you can, respect your enemy and, their abilities, but not respect what they fought for or what it is that they went for. And so when we go through Robert E. Lee, he was actually, during his time, a great general. I mean, there was no debating his skills and talents as a military tactician. In fact, the Civil War dragged on as long as it did, long after the South should have been defeated because of General Lee. Now, General Lee himself did not actually believe in slavery. You could get that from historical documents and records. And he was such a great military general that Abraham Lincoln had initially asked him to lead the Union Army. Now, Robert E. Lee, though, he declined the Union Army. Why? Because despite, everything, as he stated, his loyalty was not to the federal government, but rather to the individual leaders of his state. His state government, which was filled with flawed people. And he was blindly loyal to the leaders of his state, but not to philosophy or ideas. And so he goes from being on course to going down in history as one of the great generals of all time to being a villain of all time. Why? What's the lesson there? The lesson of Robert E. Lee is the dangers of blind loyalty, not loyalty to an idea, a philosophy, not loyalty to, aspirational, evolution of mankind, but blind loyalty to individual people who are flawed. And so he goes off and leads the Confederacy. And yes, he ends up losing, but he goes down in history as the villain. And we take a look at the left today and their followers. And we see that they are not loyal to any ideas or philosophy. We see them switching, doing complete 180s on every issue just for political convenience. They're always analyzing every statement in order to twist and spin it into the current gotcha. We talk about moving the goalpost. By the time the right, decides, okay, we'll, agree, this is the goalpost, boom, they move the goalpost and claim that the old goalpost is racist and systemic oppression. Because they have to constantly move around, in order to claim that everybody else who doesn't agree with them is racist. They view power pretty much like a dog chasing a car. Their only goal is to catch the car, but they wouldn't know what to do with it once they got it. And we see this every time the Democrats gain almost complete control of an area, it falls to crap. You get high crime, you get, systemic, oppression and inequality, and their solution is always just vote more Democrats. And it's interesting to see that because they are just loyal to whoever the claimed leader is of the particular group that they follow on the left. and the marching orders. And they just blindly follow these people, these flawed individuals who themselves have no morals or underlying philosophy. They just want power for power's sake. And they got to constantly shift the goalpost in order to keep the money train coming in to their organization so that they don't have to worry about going out and getting real jobs. And so we see today's left and those that follow them are making the same mistake as Robert E. Lee in the Confederacy. And that is blind loyalty, not questioning anything, and just willing to go along with any narrative shift as they want. Let's see here. Any thoughts on UBI? UBI is not the subject of this particular episode. Maybe I'll get to it towards the end, but for right now, I just want to stick along this thought process. And the Democrats' answers, to past racism today is more racism. And so when we see throughout history, and especially American history, the dangers of the left's, unquestionable blind loyalty just to individual people, and seeing that playing out again today, we can see why they want to remove monuments. Because monuments serve as a public reminder of the lessons that we need to learn and take away. And it's easy to convince people to repeat the mistakes of the past as long as they don't know what actually happened in the past. And tearing down monuments to remove the lessons from the public consciousness, to edit and rewrite history, to cover up the left's, atrocious behaviors and atrocities they committed throughout history. And by the way, if you're going out there and you're defacing and, destroying Abraham Lincoln's monument, declaring that he's a racist, while at the same time you're donating to the Democrat Party, I would say you need to go back to school because you failed history class. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Now, okay, so one person here, Kenzie boy, just go to a museum. You don't need statues of a slave driver. Laughing my ass off. I get what you're trying to state there, but no, you don't want to just keep these things in a museum, because keeping things in a museum allows people to ignore the history. I can tell you there's, I'd say the overwhelming majority of the American society doesn't go to museums. And hiding things away in a museum is like trying to hide things away in the closet. You're just trying to keep them out of public sight, instead of having a public reminder of it. And let's also face it, there are plenty of people throughout history that are just complex. You can't boil it down to just because they did one bad thing or they engaged in one evil thing doesn't necessarily mean everything they did was bad. Let's take a look at Washington and Jefferson. Here were our founding fathers that, wanted to break away from the tyranny, of the British Empire. And they were able to successfully do so and found a nation, and based on their idea that all men should be created equal. But there was the issue of slavery. Now, if we go back and take a look at the historical records, Washington and Jefferson, at the Constitutional Convention tried to, end slavery right then and there. But they didn't necessarily have the political, power to do so. The slave owners, did manage to basically outvote them or outnumber them. And they had a difficult decision to make. Split this new fledgling country into two right off the bat, and leave them vulnerable for the British Empire to come back and reconquer them, or to give in to the slave owners to keep a country united for defense, with the hopes that future generations would eventually see the evils of slavery and abolish it. Well, future generations eventually did see the evils of slavery and did abolish it. Now, did they own slaves themselves? Well, yes, from what we know. And we knew that based off of the laws of the time, they were not allowed to free their slaves. So all they could do at the time is try to treat the slaves as best possible and then let them gain their freedom when they died, which was the only way to free the slaves at the time. It's just is when the slave owner died, and basically, teaching their kids and their family not to replace any of the slaves, to not buy anymore, and that's how they got us, were able to get out of slavery based off of what the laws were at the time. And it's interesting as we go through and we see that, because we see people trying to go, oh, just because they own slaves means nothing else they did mattered, even if their personal beliefs were slavery was bad. But, they inherited, slaves being, of wealth, from their, parents as well. The only thing they could do is just not replace slavery, not add any more to them, and try to allow them to be released as soon as possible, which was at the time upon their death. And so we see, all the complexities there. I mean, it's not as simple as everything. And you got to remember, at that particular point in history, slavery had already been going on for 5,000 years. You can go all the way back to ancient Egypt and the enslavement of the Hebrew people. Now, while the left wants to go through and tear down any monuments in the United States in which they can claim a connection to slavery, you don't hear them talking about taking down and destroying all of the pyramids of Egypt, all of which was built by slave labor. In fact, there's still some countries in the world today in which slavery is still going on. But to denounce the United States, for the evils of slavery that had gone on for thousands of years before the founding of the United States, in which the United States led the charge in ending the practice of slavery, it is an ignorant view of history, and what the left is trying to do. Of course, the left only wants to blame everything on the United States, because if they can convince people that, the United States was founded on evil, then they can try and gain support in order to overthrow the government and then re-implement their system of tyranny, top-down control over every aspect of your life. And so it is interesting as we go through and see the left's failure to learn the lessons of history, and how they just can't seem to recognize that they're repeating the same mistakes because they were never actually taught the unedited version of history. So, I mean, that's where I wanted to go as it relates to the Confederacy and, the left today and the failures to learn the lessons of the Confederacy. But there is another topic that I do want to talk about here, and that is the left's, claims of peaceful protesting in the wake of George Floyd. There's a lot of media manipulation here. So if you were to go through and you take a look at Antifa and Black Lives Matter, they're basically funded by the same individuals, and a large part of that is George Soros. They're funded and they operate together with, separate appearance goals, right? So Black Lives Matter is supposed to present itself more as, peaceful demonstrators, while the Antifa group is, of course, violent and anarchists, right? And there's a large case to be made that Antifa is just the rebranding of the KKK. And think about this. Antifa usually comes in to largely minority communities, loot their businesses, burn their businesses down, burn some of their homes down, and wherever they go, black people end up getting killed in the protests. And the Democrat Party, who have a horrible track record as it relates to race, as we discussed earlier, with the issue of slavery, celebrates them, right? And then when Antifa leaves an area, the minority communities are devastated and they're knocked back, years, if not decades, worth of hard work in rising them and trying to lift themselves out of poverty, right? But as it relates to the media manipulation here, and I got to thinking about this as people are saying, well, they removed peaceful protesters so Trump could do a photo op at a church. And it's like, well, the church was set on fire. These people were rioting. They literally set the church on fire. Well, they weren't being violent at the time the police removed them. And the left has this idea that as long as, they can be as violent as they want, just as long as they stop the violence momentarily when the police show up and go, well, yeah, I mean, we were completely violent and, burning things down 5 minutes ago, but we stopped doing that now that you showed up. So, we're peacefully protesting. You can't remove us. That's not how this works. The moment you engage in violence and arson in an area, it doesn't matter if when the cameras show up and the police show up, you decide you're going to be peaceful at that particular moment. You are still needing to be cleared from the area because you were being violent. Right? It's like the Naked Gun, where he's going off and go, nothing to see here, folks. Move along, while a building is blowing up behind him. Which we've all seen that MSNBC video where he's trying to go, yes, this group here is peacefully protesting. And when the camera's on, we see people that are just kind of standing around, talking, all that. And we're all supposed to ignore the building right behind them, literally on fire, right? And this is what they try to do. They try to keep all of the violence off camera, and keep the non-violent, the people that are trying to act peaceful on camera. And so, Black Lives Matter will be in an area, Antifa will come in, start destroying everything, right? The police show up, Antifa moves like a block or two away, off camera, leaving the people that are now just looking peaceful, and we're supposed to ignore all the broken windows, burning buildings, and all of that. And then the media comes in, turns on the camera and go, these people are peacefully protesting. Don't look at any of the buildings in the background. And the police need to move them away. Why? Well, they need to move them away so fire trucks can get to the area to try and put out fires. God forbid anybody was in the building when it was set on fire. They need to clear the violence away and secure the area from further violence and damages and all of that. But the media tries to claim, no, they're peacefully protesting now. What they did 5 minutes ago doesn't matter. They've calmed down now. And so you also got, these Black Lives Matter, that are on camera trying to act peacefully, acting as human shields and buffer between the police and the violent rioters that are off camera. So what the media shows is here's the police, here's the people whose goal is to look peaceful, right? Off camera, you have the violent rioters still engaging in violence, but you're not seeing that on the camera, right? They know about video manipulation and how to set up scenes and cinematography, and the police need to get past this group in order to get to this violent group over here. But this group is refusing to disperse, right? And the media wants to say they're being, civil and peacefully protesting, but they're blocking the police from getting to the violent rioters who are starting more fires. And this goes into the media manipulation. There's a lot of great examples out there. I should probably have gotten the pictures showing, what you saw on camera and then what you saw off camera, and the media manipulation of that. Now, of course, Chris Cuomo on CNN goes, where does it say protesters have to be polite? And it's like, it's literally right there in the First Amendment of the Constitution where it says to peacefully protest. And if you're burning down a building, that's not the definition of peaceful protest. And if you are calling that a peaceful protest, may I suggest a dictionary for you to look up the word peaceful. But we see this, right? And so you got, one or two people funding Black Lives Matter and Antifa, right? One to be the public face to look peaceful, one to cause all the violence, one to be on camera as a buffer between the police and the violence, and then the violence off camera, and, trying to go through and get to them. And of course, it's all demonizing the police. Now, the media, of course, they go along with this because when you see the violence and the rioting, when you see them trying to push the race war and all that, you see that the media's ratings go up. That means how much they can charge advertisers to advertise on their networks go up. And so the media gets this huge profit boost whenever these violent riots come out. And these groups of Black Lives Matter can get a lot of donations because they're able to portray themselves as a victim group, being brutalized by the police, right? And so they get the donations, and then that donation goes to the Democrats, which gives them free reign to destroy all the communities in which they, enter into, right? And then, that money, going between the Democrats and back, to their funding source, then gets redistributed, funds the violence that the media tries to keep off camera. There's a lot of money involved in trying to keep and at stake and trying to keep the violence going. And the media, knows that, by manipulating the public and showing a false reality of what's going on benefits their bottom line, as they're able to create more hate and division. And the Democrats love it because not only do they get to manipulate all of that anger into votes for them, even though they're largely behind all of the hate and division, and they get to try and get more elected seats, more elected power, and all of that crap. They get that funding and elections, but they get to sit back and enjoy the destruction of the United States as they get towards more top-down tyrannical control by them. And they give these groups free reign to cause all of this mayhem and destruction. And so it's interesting as we go through and we take a look at the dynamics of what's going on and how the left is trying to claim, well, as long as they stop the violence temporarily when the police show up, it means that the area is now immune to all the violence that was going on 5 minutes ago from having them cleared out. It is really, really, interesting as you go through and you analyze what the Democrats have set up, all for money and political power, to try and push through narratives that will result in policies that strip us of any and all constitutional rights, which is their ultimate goal, because they want to go back to the Confederacy, right, is what the Democrats are trying to do, where they once again have a order of, oppression, where the top 1%, of the Democrats dictate to everybody else every aspect of their life. It is really, I don't know whether, they really have the full comprehensive plan of what they're doing, or if they're just blindly going through and saying, hey, yeah, that sounds good, let's go ahead and do that. And just taking up any ideas of, how, from their so-called victim groups on how to just give these so-called victim groups that aren't actual victim groups in today's society, all the power and control, and it's very evil what they are doing. It's just as evil as when they were calling themselves the Confederacy. All right. So, that's kind of all that I wanted to get to today, and the issues. And I hope this gave you a lot to go through and think about. Now, I know when I was using my hands for visual displays, that won't necessarily translate well on the audio podcast. I get that. All right. So you can always check out the video version of the show. Just go to Twitch or YouTube and, look up the Jacob Johnston Show, or you can go to Facebook and Twitter and look up Alteran News, whatever, however you want to consume this particular information. All right. So that's where I want to leave it today. And I want to thank you for tuning in. I like to thank the people here in the chat that have been active and, across the various platforms here, and going through and, taking a look at this. I appreciate the support. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will be back again soon.